So we really want take the opportunity to do this and kind of get the format and also kind of build the muscle both of ourselves as an organization, but then also of our strong community members that we engage with at the Environmental Center. So thanks for being a part of it. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And then when we get to everyone's individual parts, we'll want to make sure that everyone introduces themselves individually. And once I share my screen, I probably won't be able to see the waiting room if anybody hops in. So can you all see the screen now?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so welcome to our Advocacy 101 Make Your Voice Heard at the State Capitol event. My name's Neil Bonsgard. My pronouns are he, him, and I work on climate and transportation policy here at the Environmental Center. I know some of our participants know about us well, but for our speakers as well, this is the Environmental Center. We're located in downtown Bend and are focused on working in the Central Oregon community to make, be a sustainability hub and working on kind of expanding that so we can make sure that we have a voice as Central Oregon in some of the larger conversations that are happening as well. So we've recognized that in the work that we've done, how important it is to we have a voice and we have a story as an organization for the members that we represent, but really wanting to take that conversation and be as effective with it as possible. And it's definitely been a learning curve. So tonight, we're kind of in that phase right now of talking a little bit about why this is important, and then also jumping into our two areas of our legislative priorities for the Environmental Center for this year. And then we're going to have some partners share some training and information on providing testimony and kind of finding your voice. And then this is a nice, small, intimate group. And so really kind of looking at who's here, this is also an opportunity for us to kind of take it whichever direction we want. If folks are interested in diving into the bills that we're interested in or that are part of our priorities for the year, or if folks have specific questions about either testimony in general or like for this bill package, like what's coming up next, we can kind of go whichever direction makes sense for the group. So feel free to ask questions. We can keep this informal and conversational, and we'll go from there. So I think one of the reasons that the Environmental Center has gotten more involved in this work was recognizing, we've always recognized the importance of individual action, but recognizing that individual action, builds up to be collective action. And we've done that a lot in kind of our work in schools and directly working with community members. But we have also realized the importance of that collective action and advocacy that we can do at different levels. And the Environmental Center has really been focused on the places where we have a little bit more control. So that's been the local level, talking about the city and the state, or sorry, city and county, and then at the state level. And we have been doing that over the past few years and really seen kind of at different levels how we can be effective. And that has been both through the legislative process, but also through like agency work and a lot of like nerdy work that Udara and I will spend time doing. And so I think what we're working on in this presentation is really trying to expand that out to get some more community members that aren't necessarily in the weeds to still be able to kind of take advantage of the work that these coalitions have put into these bills, and kind of hearing the change that we want to see, and being able to dive in and do that work. So I'm going to pass off to Udara to introduce herself and the waste priorities to start. Then we're going to talk about the building resilience bills, and then we'll jump into the testimony training with Becca and Emily.
Thanks, Neil. So I wanted to just provide some context as to why some of the waste bills are really important and relevant here in our communities in Central Oregon. And so my name is Udara Becca. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program manager for the Rethink Waste Project, which is a program at the Environmental Center. And we work to empower Deschutes County residents, visitors, and businesses to first reduce waste and then look at opportunities to recover waste. So Neil, if you could go the next slide as like a little visual of what we mean by that. We really believe in this, waste hierarchy where we have an understanding that reduce really has the biggest impact, because if we reduce first, we're not making waste in the first place. And as you work your way down that action hierarchy, can somebody mute? Okay, I'm going to mute someone there. And as we work our way down the waste hierarchy, we're still making an impact, but there's other waste and energy resources that accumulate throughout the process. So really, recycling is part of the solution, but should really be a last resort. And so on the next slide, I wanted to just briefly demonstrate what I mean by that. So hopefully this graphic, are okay to recycle, not okay to recycle. Folks have seen that in different shapes and forms. And this applies specifically to Deschutes County because our waste infrastructure is currently really community specific based on what we have access to, what resources and tools we have for collection, what end markets we have access to, and all of that. So since we have a participatory size group, I'm curious if you'd be willing to share what stands out for you as maybe like a challenge in what we have capacity to recycle and what we cannot accept to recycle or can't accept for recycling in Deschutes County. Does anything stand out for folks as a challenge?
I'll jump in, Udara. I guess just speaking from personal experience, the wax covered materials, that's such a pain in the butt because it's primarily paper and it's so frustrating. And I find myself in situations where I want to take the meal that I just purchased home, but I know it's going to come in a way that can't be recycled, right? So that sort of thing is frustrating to me. So coffee cups and to-go containers, that sort of thing. And then clamshells as well is a big one. A lot of things at the grocery store come in clamshells and are the bane of my existence. So that's for me.
Yeah, same. I see a few dittos and agreement in the chat. So you pointed out a few really important pieces, right? So vast majority of plastics are not collected for recycling in Deschutes County because we either, lack the resources or tools for collection or sorting, and there aren't really responsible end markets that are collecting this stuff to be recycled. And frankly, a lot of these materials aren't really designed for recycling. So as a result of all that, less than 9% of plastics globally have ever been recycled. And you can compare that to about 75% of aluminum products that are still in use today, and about 90%, broadly speaking, of glass that's recycled in communities with a separate glass collection stream like we have here in Deschutes County. So, right, one thing that we're seeing is recycling is not the end-all solution. So we really need to look at reduce. Not only is plastic an issue downstream, but when we look upstream, there are more issues. Virtually all plastic is made of fossil fuels like oil, and the explosion of single-use plastics in the last few decades puts the U.S. plastics industry's contribution to climate change on track to exceed that of coal-fired power in the country by 2030. So there's some significant challenges with plastics, right? And another challenge we run into is, just like Jacob pointed out, even if you as an individual wanted to reduce your consumption of plastic packaging, we're extremely limited on options. When you look specifically at packaging for foods at the grocery store, we really don't have any significant alternatives. So that's why we really need to look beyond just that individual action piece, like Neil had mentioned. So if you want to hit the next slide, right? So what we're seeing is that these problems exist at all of these scales. And so we really need to focus our solutions at all the scales as well. And so shifting gears, I'm really excited to introduce Celeste Meiffren-Swango, who's here to share about some of these solutions at this society or policy level scale. And so I'll let Celeste more formally introduce herself, but I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with Celeste, and she's been coordinating a group of organizations that support these bills and really helping us all navigate this legislative session. And this is my first time engaging in this grassroots advocacy work. I've already learned so much from Celeste, and I'm glad that she's here to share some of her insights with all of us.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I do have some slides to share. I can do that. Awesome. All right. Okay, how am I looking? Udara, good?
Good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that kind introduction and table setting, Udara. My name is, as she said, my name is Celeste Meiffren-Swango. I'm the state director with Environment Oregon. We're a statewide member-based environmental advocacy organization. We do work on a whole variety of issues, working for clean air, clean water, open space, and a livable climate. And I really appreciate you all inviting me to speak this evening. So I did want to take just a few minutes to give a quick overview of the problem of plastic pollution. And I just think it's helpful to provide that context so that our policy solutions kind of make sense from there. And then I'll walk through some of the bills that we're working on this session. Okay. As Udara mentioned, there's simply no escape from plastic, right? Look at all these clamshells. Our society and our culture is becoming more and more of a throwaway culture, and more of the products that we use are intended to be used just one time and thrown away. So our economy encourages us to make, use, and toss at the greatest possible speed. And as a result, every single day, people are throwing away tons of plastic stuff: cups, plates, bags, straws, containers, clamshells, forks, knives, spoons, you name it. And when we're done with these single-use plastics, usually after just a few minutes of use, we throw them away. Only there is no away. So as was mentioned, only a very small percentage of plastics actually get recycled, less than 9%. Some get incinerated, about 12%, which is bad for public health and our climate. And then the rest either ends up in the landfills or in our natural environment. And as a result, plastics have been found everywhere that we've looked, from the Mariana Trench to the top of Mount Everest and everywhere in between. And our oceans are hit especially hard. So globally, 33 billion pounds of plastic enter the marine environment every year. And scientists have found plastic fragments in literally hundreds of species, including 44% of all seabird species, 43% of all marine mammal species. And a recent study even found plastic in every single individual sea turtle that they studied. It's no surprise then that single-use plastics are some of the most commonly found items at beach cleanups in Oregon, according to data collected by Surfrider and Solve. But the plastic pollution is not just a coastal or marine problem. River cleanup events held on the Willamette River have found that about 60% of the debris that's being removed is plastic. Willamette Riverkeeper removed 389 pickup beds worth of plastic from just the lower Willamette in 1 year, which is obviously just a fraction of the actual amount of plastic in the river. But litter alone doesn't capture the full scope of our plastic pollution problem. Some research suggests that we could be not counting about 99% of the plastic that makes its way into the ocean. And that's because plastic doesn't degrade in the environment like an apple or a piece of paper. Instead, it breaks into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic called microplastics which are plastics that are less than 5 millimeters in length or smaller than a grain of rice. At Environment Oregon, we did a survey of 30 waterways in 2021. We took water samples and tested them for microplastics, and we found microfibers and or microplastic particles in every single waterway that we looked. So that's the Willamette, the Rogue, and the Deschutes Rivers, Wallowa Lake, Crater Lake, and other Oregon treasures. And you can find our Microplastics in Oregon report on our website. And then, as was mentioned, plastics are also really bad for our climate. The plastics industry emits an enormous amount of greenhouse gases. Between manufacturing, use, and disposal, the US plastics industry was responsible for at least 232 million tons of CO2 gas emissions, which is equivalent to the average emissions from 116 coal-fired power plants. And that soon, by 2030, plastics production will surpass emissions from coal. So this is obviously all very bad news for our planet. And I haven't even mentioned the pollution that spews from drilling or microplastics infiltrating our bodies, or plastic incineration poisoning communities, or big oil making major investments in petrochemical facilities across the country, but you get the idea. And at the end of the day, we believe that nothing we use for just a few minutes should pollute the environment for hundreds of years. And ultimately, we need to turn off the plastic tap, or the problem is going to get exponentially worse in the coming years. And so to reduce the amount of plastic waste that ends up in our environment, we need to dramatically reduce the amount of disposable plastic products that are handed to consumers every day. And many of these items are totally unnecessary and easily replaceable. So this means phasing out the most wasteful items, mandating meaningful reduction at the source, and transitioning away from single-use products altogether to reusable and refillable alternatives wherever possible. And we're making progress in Oregon. In 2019, the Oregon legislature passed a ban on single-use plastic grocery bags. And in 2021, the Oregon legislature passed the Recycling Modernization Act, making Oregon the second state in the country to establish a producer responsibility program for packaging and paper products, which will bring producers in to start bearing some of the costs of the system through a shared responsibility model. And the hope there, of course, is that this model will encourage producers to create less wasteful packaging. And I serve as vice chair of the Recycling Council to help oversee the implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act. And that work is already underway. But our work to address plastic pollution is not over. We still have a lot of work to do to get rid of some of the most unnecessary single-use plastics in Oregon. And we have been working with a really great coalition of organizations, including the Environmental Center, on these policies. So I'll walk through each of them quickly. So the first is Senate Bill 543, which would phase out polystyrene foam containers. Polystyrene is commonly known as styrofoam. This is a very wasteful plastic product. It is typically not reused. It's not accepted in curbside recycling, and it's one of the top items found polluting Oregon's beaches. And so Senate Bill 543 would ban polystyrene foam foodware, coolers, and packing peanuts across Oregon. And this bill would also phase out toxic PFAS, which is a toxic forever chemical from food packaging as well. So this bill, Senate Bill 543, had a public hearing on Valentine's Day. And we're hoping it'll get scheduled for a work session in the Senate Energy and Environment Committee next week. The next bill is Senate Bill 544. So this proposed bill requires producers to reduce the amount of single-use plastic packaging and foodware by 25% over the next decade. If your bathtub is overflowing, you wouldn't start by bailing out the water, you'd start by turning off the tap. And so we need to turn off the plastic tap and reduce the amount of single-use plastics entering the market in the first place. And in June, California passed a sweeping bill addressing plastic pollution, and it included a requirement that all producers reduce the amount of plastic they use in their products by 25% by both weight and unit over the next 10 years. And so we want to do the same thing here in Oregon. This bill had a public hearing also on Valentine's Day. And at this point, we're on it, just to be frank, uncertain if it will get scheduled for a work session. And then the final bill addressing plastic pollution is Senate Bill 545, which attempts to, or basically instructs the Oregon Health Authority to update their health code to make it easier for Oregon restaurants to provide reusable containers or allow customers to bring their own reusable containers from home. The Oregon Department of Agriculture recently updated their health code for retail and grocery stores, making it easier for Oregon businesses to allow people to bring reusable containers for bulk purchases and for produce. And so we're excited to see this bill moving forward and hopeful that we'll see more restaurants providing reusable options for customers. And this bill just passed out of committee yesterday, which is very exciting, and will be headed to the Senate floor next week. All right, and then our last one is right to repair. And this is not, of course, technically about plastics, but it is part of our zero waste package of bills and one that the Environmental Center has been doing a lot of really great work on. So I wanted to make sure to mention it. And the basic thing here is that we generate a lot of e-waste, and big companies are using their power in the marketplace to make things harder to repair them. And preventing repair just reinforces the linear economic cycle of buying, using, and discarding at the fastest possible speed. And in this case, it is also eating up precious natural resources on the front end and creating a mountain of waste on the back end, all while exacerbating climate change. And so right to repair requires companies to make available the parts, tools, and repair manuals and schematics to consumers and independent repair professionals to allow Oregonians to fix our stuff. So Senate Bill 542 would give Oregonians the right to repair our personal electronic devices and appliances. And the hope is that it would help to extend the life of electronics and help conserve precious resources, mitigate climate pollution, and prevent waste. And right to repair had a hearing on February 9th, and there's an amendment that's currently being drafted. That's not going to significantly change the bill, but once that's completed, we're hopeful it will get scheduled for a work session soon. And I'll just wrap up to share my contact information, but then happy to answer questions when we get to it. But thank you again so much for having me.
Thanks, Celeste. And while I'm switching the slides over, there's a question in the chat for the bill number for the single-use plastics bill.
So there's three. The one for to get rid of polystyrene foam foodware is Senate Bill 543. The bill to require producers to reduce their plastic production by 25% is Senate Bill 544. And then the legalizing reusables is Senate Bill 545.
Great. And let's just do questions now while things are top of mind. Jacob,
all right, great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste, for all that. So one thing that I've long wondered about is it's my understanding that all plastics, not just single use, are produced from the byproducts from refining oil. So our plastic economy is directly related to our non-renewable energy economy. So when we're talking about recycling, or even better, not using plastic entirely, my mind immediately goes to, well, if this is a byproduct from oil refining, where is that byproduct then going to be going? So is refusing plastic just kind of deferring the problem and potentially causing a problem somewhere else? I know that's probably not that's not the intent of this session necessarily, but it's a question that's been burning in my mind, and I figured this is a good group to ask.
Yeah, it is a good question. My understanding is that it's not just a byproduct of fossil fuel. I mean, they are extracting natural gas to make plastic products in and of themselves. And we're actually seeing, as we're transitioning away from the direct burning of fossil fuels for transportation and electricity, that these big oil and gas companies are making huge investments in petrochemical facilities across the country, because they see this as kind of their next big cash cow. And so we want to make sure that we are stopping that from happening, and so that we're not seeing the transitions from fossil fuels for transportation to electricity simply shifting to using those fossil fuels for the production of single-use and other plastic products. So they are definitely intertwined in that they're the same polluting big interest, and we want to just make sure that we're not kind of allowing them to grow in this other way in our economy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question as well. Just as you move these plastics bills forward, are you finding like fierce opposition in the legislature from like an activated fossil fuel sector, or are they moving forward pretty easily? I noticed that only one had gotten stalled, but I'd love to just hear like how vigorous the fight is.
Yeah, so I would say the bill that has the most opposition is Senate Bill 544, which is the one that would require producers. It's the biggest lift in terms of what we would be asking of producers, which is to reduce their use of plastics by 25% over the next decade. And that one is there. I can link to the opposition letter, but it's like every major industry opposed it. Senate Bill 543, to ban polystyrene foam, was very contentious in 2019, and actually came very close to not passing the House, and then it died on the floor of the Senate, which just like does not happen in Oregon politics. They don't bring forward bills unless they think unless they know they have the votes, and so it was a really big deal, and so people sort of flagged it as being controversial. And the reason is that on their way to the vote, the plastics industry lobbyist who works for the American Chemistry Council was seen talking to the woman who then flipped her vote on the floor. So this year, I think, given that there are kind of momentum is on our side, and I think our legislature now, because there are so many new legislators, is a lot more friendly than it was in 2019. We're just finding it. Plus, Senate Bill 544 is likely not moving forward. I think they're kind of like easing off their opposition, but the American Chemistry Council and these other big industry groups are not excited about the bill, if that makes sense.
Oh, am I on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm glad that styrofoam is going to be limited or banned. But is there a something to replace styrofoam? We have a styrofoam top of our hot tub, and I've been looking for as an alternative, and I did find a couple, but they're horribly expensive.
Yeah. Well, I will say this bill won't limit your hot tub lid. So it specifically deals with foodware, packing peanuts, and coolers. So kind of the like single use polystyrene versus the it does not include like product packaging, like big block styrofoam. I wish that it did, but it doesn't.
Right.
So
I'd like to have something different, but it's not. The options are just expensive. This doesn't mean they're out of sight, but they're a lot more expensive than just styrofoam.
Yeah, totally. But I think for the single use stuff, there is absolutely tons of alternatives, especially on the foodware side. And then there are alternatives to packing peanuts. And, like we're seeing a lot of innovation in that area, because I think the industry in general is kind of moving away from styrofoam. But like they're making packing peanuts out of like mushrooms and that kind of thing. So, so that the styrofoam products that we're going after are do have viable replacements.
And one other thing, are you involved with the getting the new landfill that we're looking at building in the next 10 years or whatever, to make sure or be sure that there's a lot more recycling going on there? Because when we toured it last, there was not a whole lot of recycling because of the cost to recycle.
And big package stores like Michael's would just send trucks full of cardboard that could be easily recycled, that isn't being recycled. Wood pallets, all kinds. I mean, it was amazing how much stuff was just getting bulldozed into the containers to take out to the landfill.
Yeah, I can speak to the
Okay,
local landfill siting piece. Is that okay? So there's the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So if you kind of Google that, it's SWAC, Solid Waste Advisory Committee. It's a group of people that the Deschutes County Solid Waste has convened to review some of the potential locations. So I think the first focus is going to be on the locations, and then looking at some more of like the capacity and capabilities. But the Recycling Modernization Act that Celeste had mentioned would also support increased access to recycling some of the currently hard to recycle materials, and also support increased service as well, hopefully beginning in 2025.
My last question is why, if recycling is mandatory in a lot of states, plastic, why is there only 9% of it being recycled? Is government not enforcing it?
It's just not a very high quality material, and it's really difficult to actually turn into another plastic product. So on average, you can only recycle even the highest quality plastics like about 3 times, whereas you can recycle aluminum again and again, and glass again and again and again. So it ends up just getting downcycled into things like thin plastic film, and then eventually ends up in the landfill. So it's just not a sustainable material.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, thanks for that. Thanks for those good questions, and thanks for that overview. I'm gonna start sharing my screen and talk about our other set of priorities for this year, and having some technical difficulties, but can you all see the screen and hear me? Yes, okay, great. So I'm going to give a little bit of a kind of condensed background on some of the important history of climate-related bills in Oregon and its buildings. So this is all of the bills that we're excited about. This resilient buildings bill package that's coming forward is kind of really heavily leaning upon a lot of victories and leaderships that we found up until this point. So we were able to see some really amazing bills over the past couple of years in response to the deadly heat dome of 2021, and recognition that cooling is now a human right in Oregon. As we're living through climate change, that's really a change that we've all seen in our lifetimes, where cooling was something that was optional and nice, to becoming more of a necessity and a requirement here. We also saw some, and this really does kind of change a lot of the direction that we go with these bills, is with the Clean Energy for All bill in 2021. We are seeing that our, strong commitments that our electricity grid is getting cleaner over time. Just going to skip over a couple of these other pieces so we make sure we have enough time. So last year, or over the past 2 years, we were very involved in the Environmental Center was involved in some bills in the legislature to try to help move buildings forward, recognizing so that our homes and buildings account for a really large share of Oregon's carbon emissions, but also that it's the places that we live and work, and there's a lot of other impacts that our buildings have. And so trying to find that balance and trying to find the opportunities that we have in our built environment around resilience and climate and climate justice. So after the last legislature, there was a task force that was formed called the Resilient and Efficient Buildings Task Force. And I sat on that and was able to, the group worked through proposals. It was a large stakeholder group, worked through proposals and to try to look at ways that we can meet our state climate goals and while building a more resilient and just set of buildings. So the bills that that have been introduced through that process and that are the resilient buildings package. The first one is called Senate Bill 868, which is healthy heating and cooling for all. And just an overview, there's 4 bills, and the way that I've kind of tried to summarize it, it's the first one is about existing buildings. So those are the buildings that are already in the ground that we're already living and working in today. The second bill is about new buildings. So recognizing that that we have a lot of growth that we're experiencing right now, and we're setting the standard for what people are going to be living and working in the future. The third is about large commercial buildings, and the fourth is about state buildings. So we'll go into the first one, Senate Bill 868, healthy homes or healthy heating and cooling for all. So one of the things that's important that this did is right now our energy efficiency programs, we have state climate goals through an executive order. And one of the really important things that this bill does is it codifies that. It puts that goal that was lofty and was set in an executive order and puts it into statute. So then it's much more likely to actually happen. We can make sure that we can be aligned in that process. This also is really focused on the rapid deployment of heat pumps. It also sets a statewide goal of 500,000 heat pumps to be installed by 2030 and focused on underserved communities. And it is really aligning a lot of work that's happening in different agencies across the state to be able to come back with that and actually make progress towards that goal, because we are in the age of the heat pump. So this is a really exciting and large bill there. So that's 868. The next one in the package is called Build Smart from the Start. So this is that new buildings piece. And one of the big things that this does is, again, focusing on new construction, is trying to make sure that our new construction is more efficient and resilient and has less climate pollution. And so that is doing that in a number of ways. One is by actually saying in our code, we have an energy code, but our energy code is really coming off of the history of an energy crisis in the 70s. That was when we first had an energy code. So all of its background is focused on saving energy and saving dollars, but that was because we were in an energy crisis then. We now are in a climate crisis. And so this adds into the building code that it's about climate. It's not just about dollars and kilowatt hours. The other really exciting thing that this does is it talks about embodied carbon. And so that is it's asking Building Codes Division to look at the carbon that it takes to make the materials, to source, transport, and use the materials that are in our buildings. And so it's an attempt of addressing those. And because this has never been part of our state policies, there's a lot of opportunities to benefit from looking at embodied carbon. The third one is called Building Performance Standard. And this is about large commercial buildings. So this is setting efficiency targets for large commercial buildings that they have to meet over time. And so this is really saying like, hey, when we're talking, they haven't settled on a final number yet, but it's either 35,000 or 50,000 square feet. So think like Costco or Safeway. Don't think like your nail salon or auto repair store. So this is really focusing on saying, hey, if we limit the number of buildings, I think in Portland, the number of buildings that are, or the less than half of the buildings in Portland are over 35,000 square feet, but 90-something% of the building area is included in those buildings. So it's a small number of buildings relating to a large amount of building square footage. And it's also talking about really large buildings that have the complexity to be able to further their efficiency. So they're set up and ready to go for that. And then the last one's called Smart State Buildings, Senate Bill 871. And that's really trying to lead by example and taking our government-owned or state-owned and financed buildings to have them kind of follow these same goals and move forward there. So I think that's what I have there. An overview of where all of these are at is a very exciting spot because all of these bills were kind of or looking through some drafts of the bills right now. But next Tuesday, they're going to have a work session where not a work session. They're going to have a hearing where they have invited testimony and talk about the bills. And then next Thursday from 1 to 2:30, they're going to have a public hearing where they want to hear from us. And so this is really perfect timing for the next phase of our presentation, which is about actually providing testimony, because the opportunity is really kind of acute for these bills. So in looking at our time, I'm going to jump over to that piece of the training with Becca, and then we can answer specifics about this, and we can also follow up with any of those specifics after this. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass it off to Becca.
Thanks, Neil. Well, hey, everyone, some of who I know and a couple who I don't. My name is Becca Phelps. I use she, her pronouns, and my role is with Unite Oregon, which is a statewide nonprofit that I'd be happy to tell you all more about, but for the sake of time, I might jump into the presentation. I'm the Climate Resilience and Environmental Justice Manager at Unite Oregon, and my coworker Emily is here with me, and we're going to tag team on a just kind of short and informal also training about providing testimony. So let me pop this in. You all can see this. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to reshare in present mode. Does that work?
We're seeing the wrong screen. We're seeing your notes.
Thanks. How about that?
Still the same.
Didn't change.
Did the first one work better?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this. We did a great testimony training with some community members across the state the past week or so, and we'll continue to do these just because they're really important. And I think a big part of why I love, I'm going to move this one over, why I love what we do at Unite is a bit, sorry, I'm going to just move this tab over. Okay. Is doing the advocacy work at the level where we're able to influence policy. So now that we have like a connection with the Environmental Center, and for those of you who don't know, I used to work at the Environmental Center with these lovely folks on the call. We're now, doing some of that advocacy at the environmental justice level. And like Neil was mentioning, a partnership that we have now is with the Building Resilience Coalition is coming with the Environmental Center. So we offer this testimony training, even if you provided testimony in person, virtually, however you've done it before. I think just reviewing it every year as things change, as bills change, and just thinking about why it's important to provide testimony. That's sort of the goal of today. So oh, someone's in the waiting room. It's Lauren. Okay, so today our goals are just learning how to write testimonies and getting introduced to legislative solutions, and then some tips that we have for writing your testimony in the first place. And also I see the time, Neil, so I might just skip over a couple of things. But when we think about providing testimony, a lot of it is kind of basic things that you would think about why there's bills in the legislature in the first place. So there's clearly problems, as we saw from Celeste's presentation, things that Udara mentioned, things that you all mentioned that you're concerned about environmentally, and things that Neil brought up too in thinking about our buildings and our homes that we live in. So when we identify a problem, we know that there are needs and solutions to help those problems be fixed. When we think about how we address our audience, which are, the members of the legislature, we like to address leaders in the room and the group as a whole. So there's some little tips and tricks here about, identifying who we're speaking to. Oftentimes, in this case, the Senate and Energy Committee on Energy and Environment, we know the chair's name, we know the vice chair's name and last name. You can address the members of the committee as a whole, as a group. And that just, allows us to feel like we're talking to them first and last name, talking to them as real people as they are, even though they're in these positions. And we'll have, at the end, we'll share some examples and some templates of like how you can provide testimony. But this is kind of just a brief overview of how we identify ourselves when we are speaking or writing on the record. So we always want to thank the committee for the chance to, whether it's testifying again in person at a hearing, like Neil mentioned, there will be one next week for the building resilience package, or if we're submitting written testimony, it's also important to say like, thanks for, this opportunity, here's who I am. So identifying yourself is important, just, and we'll review this in a minute too, but so folks that are reading your testimony or listening to you testify know how you're associated with what you're testifying for. So it could be like how you've engaged with a particular issue or an area. Maybe it has to do, if you're testifying on behalf of a waste bill, for example, maybe you're someone who works in an industry related to that. Maybe you're someone who has just like seen the impacts. Candy, you mentioned being at a landfill tour. So it could be something like, I'm a community member concerned about waste because I've seen firsthand the impacts of how waste piles up in my community, etc. So here's an example that we've written. I won't go through and reading it. I won't read it straightforward, but making sure you do identify yourself and then say how you're engaged with a particular issue or area that you're writing or testifying about. And then sharing your particular story. This sort of gets into what I was mentioning just now, but sharing a feeling that's like relatable or understandable that relates to the issue. You can do that in as little as 2 to 3 sentences, but having some detail or having a detail that's very pertinent to the issue and memorable. So the example that I just used, Candy, with your impact of seeing how much waste is at the landfill, that's a memorable thing, just for me, even in the past hour, that I think would stand out to lawmakers. And then stating a solution. So address why the need of this service is necessary. And, maybe it's a common sense need, but also really phrasing and stating like what a good solution for that need or problem is. So that might come from the bill itself, like passing these bills will help to identify or to help fix and resolve the solutions the problem, that I stated at the beginning. And then making sure you state a call to action. kind of goes along with the solution focused mode, but ask like directly asking those lawmakers to support you and your communities by voting yes to move forward these bills or this package of bills in the committee or out of the committee that they currently are in. Let's see, I'm going to skip over a couple other things. You can submit testimony and advocate, basically using your voice in a number of ways. And the ones we're focused on tonight are, of course, submitting testimony, but there's a whole other, list of ways you can do that. Attending lobby days, attending those hearings that we mentioned. And there's some tips about testifying, but I want to make sure Emily gets to speak about the Building Resilient package testifying and sharing some tools that we have for you. So I'll pass it over to Emily now, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions too. Let us know if you want us to wrap up like a minute early or anything, Neil. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Becca. Yeah, I want to respect y'all's time, so I'm gonna go through these briefly, but if you want to stick around and ask more questions, because I went through it too fast, please do. Like, we're going to stick around at the end of the meeting. Building Resilience is a coalition made up of 6 different orgs. So there's Oregon League of Conservation, Voters, Unite Oregon, where Becca and I are from, Oregon Just Transition Alliance, Oregon Environmental Council, Climate Solutions, and the Community Energy Project. And we're really focused on building resilient homes and buildings. You can go to the next slide, Becca. And so thank y'all to Neil for really diving deep into this bill package. But why homes and buildings? When I think about climate mitigation, like I used to not really think about homes and buildings as that important, but when you think about it, we really spend like at least 75% of our day inside these spaces. We know that in Oregon, climate harms like extreme heat and wildfire smoke are here and they are growing worse. So these homes and buildings are really our first line of defense against climate harms. And we know that we have the technology and techniques available already today for resilience and electrification. And then secondly, buildings are currently our second source of climate pollution. And so we really need to like push our legislators to make sure that we have resilient homes as the standard for everyone. Next slide, Becca. So, and then there should be another little, if you click once more. Perfect. So with the Building Resilience Coalition, we believe that Oregonians deserve healthy, affordable, resilient homes and buildings that run on clean energy. This bill package, to sum it up, is really just going to provide us better health, lower utility bills every single month, less pollution, and create safer communities. This is the policy package, basically a summary of what Neil went through in depth. So there's 4 bills. There's healthy heating and cooling for all, build smart from the start, building performance standard, and smart state buildings. All of these bills are getting presented together at once at the hearing, so you don't have to submit testimony for each individual bill. Rather, it's one testimony for this entire bill package together. And so how do you testify? This is how y'all can actually pitch in and help push this forward. We really encourage you to submit written testimony, and we'll be dropping a link about where you can upload that. This isn't currently on OLIS yet, but the Building Resilience Coalition, we have a specific page where you can upload your written testimony, and then we'll put it onto that website when it opens up. And so this is kind of just following through with what Becca was presenting earlier about how to create like a compelling personal narrative. You want to start with addressing the chair, and yeah, we're going to share all of that, and the committee, and then introducing yourself. And so here it's like really up to you to think about what's relevant and how, like what title you want to use. So you share your name, share where you live to show that you're a constituent. And it also helps us in showing that we have like a really wide variety of where people come from, and that we have supporters across the entire state of Oregon. And then include a personal detail about yourself, like what gives you expertise on writing about this. And I assure you, you all have some sort of expertise. So whether you're a renter, you're a homeowner, you have experience with the wildfires over the summer, you're a student, you're like a parent concerned about the health of your children, whatever it is that you think is relevant in terms of talking about climate mitigation, you want to put that in right there. And then in our toolkit, we have like a list of key talking points, which we're going to go over, that really help you frame your personal narrative. And so because it's already 7, these are the key talking points. I'm not going to go over all of them. You can read them for yourself in our testimony toolkit, and it really lays it all out for you. And go to the next slide. These are more of the talking points that are also in the testimony toolkit. And there's one last slide about it. And then the next one, Becca. So this handy dandy testimony toolkit has like an example like of a testimony. So you can use that as a template and then plug like your important details and put in your personal narrative. And it has all of those key talking points, like what are the values that you want to hit. And then next slide, Becca. So there's going to be a public hearing on Thursday. There's going to be very little time. We're not 100% sure how long we're going to have. It might be like 45 minutes to an hour or a little over an hour. It's not 100% confirmed yet, but we would love to have some speakers there. So if you have like a compelling personal narrative and this is a cause you care about, we encourage you to show up in Salem. We do have a carpool group if you're thinking about that. And then otherwise, if Thursday, like showing up in person doesn't seem like something that you can do, you can also upload a written testimony at this link. Should take you about like less than 30 minutes to write something. It's pretty brief. We have the template and you can upload that, and that'll really help us push these bills through.
Thanks, Emily. We did drop that link to our testimony toolkit in the chat. And within the toolkit, there's another link, another form, and I'll put that separately here. It's to a system called Every Action, which I think you used to sign up for this event tonight. But the cool thing in this link is that there's a direct box where you can like literally type your testimony into here, and our team will then upload it to the system, to the OLIS like legislative system. And that's a helpful thing for us because then we are able to house your testimony so that we can potentially use some of that like language, verbiage, stories, etc., for things like social media posts, just more messaging opportunities it gives us, letters to the editor. Maybe we'll contact you later to see if, maybe you're able to tell us more about an experience. So I would recommend, if you're comfortable using that form and submitting your testimony that way, that's a really great way to do it. It also gives you the option to like start testimony and then coming back later to, finish it if you don't have time right now. So there's a variety of ways that you could submit your testimony, but that's a great one. And just to re-highlight the toolkit Emily talked about, everything's there. You can use a template that we have written. You can read up on the bills. There's links to all the bills. There's links to our contact info and some of the talking points. So I'll leave it with that, and then we can go to questions. I don't know who was first, but you all decide amongst yourselves. Okay, Candy. You're still muted.
Okay, so my question is, how is what you're talking about in this written testimony different from the lobby days that are coming up, that we are also kind of engaged in and getting training for, that's coming up? Is it in addition to it? Is it,
It's a good question. Thanks. And this is a piece I also wanted to highlight. I was like rushing myself through the beginning of my presentation, but this is like my favorite part of advocacy, which is, using our voices and having all these multiple touch points and opportunities to do that. And that's the way that we get the stuff done, honestly. So as many times, like if I know there's opportunities to like send postcards, call your legislators, show up for hearings, come to the lobby days, like there's all these things and they're all so important. And I'm seeing that more and more like evolve and being kind of on the front lines of all the work. It really does make a difference. So to answer your question, it is in addition to lobby days, are these submitting testimonies that we will be able to utilize for the hearings, or I guess this one has one hearing. So it'll help just make a presence, like make this coalition and all of its supporters known. And so the testimonies will help between like now and the hearing. And then even if you submit testimony after the hearing, that's okay. We still have lobby day where we can use your testimony. But the biggest need and ask right now is for the hearing date, because that's such a big, we've been waiting and waiting to find out when we were going to have the hearing, and now it's finally scheduled. So if that answers your question, I think all of them are important. We'll probably have more asks like around the lobby day, which is actually going to be on April 20th for this coalition, for this building resilience package. But as you probably know and have seen, groups like OLCV and other coalitions and organizations will have their own lobby days for specific bills and packages of bills.
And so you need that testimony by what date?
It would
Ideally.
It would be great to have it by Monday.
Monday. Okay.
We're doing a big uploading. So our team will take all the ones that people have submitted via this portal that I shared with you all and upload them directly into the OLIS website. And then we'll, use them, keep them housed in our like internal systems too. But we're doing that on Wednesday of next week.
Okay.
Yeah. So Monday would be a great day. Tuesday at the latest. Thanks for asking. Jacob, Mr. Fritz.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. So one of the major barriers to public engagement is accessibility, right? And like showing up at public testimony is not the easiest thing to do. More often than not, if not exclusively, it's during the workday when many of us can't step away and spend 3 hours waiting in the county commissioner's office to, say to get your 2 allotted minutes, right? So my question to you is about accessibility and kind of what steps are being taken in the state legislature to increase the ability for citizens to engage, and then related to that, like, how long do we have to submit written testimony, which is much more accessible?
Did my internet? Okay, I didn't know if
for
it was me.
everyone.
Okay. I heard you up until the very last thing about the written testimony piece, but I think I heard all your questions about accessibility, timeliness of the written testimony, and what is like the state doing to increase accessibility.
Yeah, and how do we find out when or what window do we have to submit written testimony?
Cool. Okay, so accessibility. Love this question. And at Unite, we're working really hard to expand, increase, and advocate for greater accessibility with this in policy in general. And so I do know a couple things. One is accessibility in terms of like the time of the day. I think it sucks. And there's no answers right now. There's nothing like being implemented currently, but they are hearing that a lot, specifically from youth. There's a section written into the Senate Energy and Environment like work sessions that always that they leave room for youth voices, and it's kind of like a Wednesday like Thursdays at 1 to 2:30, right? And it's youth are like, we want to come, we want to show up, but we can't, like, we're in school. Do you want us to stay in school, or do you want us to come be advocates? And if it's both, then make time and make time for youth to do that. So that's a big piece. And I think like youth are working on that. And then there's a lot of organizations that are trying to like uplift and amplify that. They're doing a big thing over spring break to talk more about that, there's some youth climate activists that we're working with, where they're having like a lobby day and testifying, and they're talking about like, do we need to write a bill about this? Like, how do we make this? How do we change this? So that's one little piece that I do know of. Another accessibility issue that we hear all the time is language barriers with the system. So currently, as it is, the OLIS system is only in English, but there's an option. You can submit testimony. I don't want to say in any language, but I know you can submit in Spanish, and legislators, the one like hiccup is like legislators can translate that, like they have to accept it. The question is like, will they translate it? So we've heard feedback from some of our Spanish speaking like community members that are part of Unite Oregon's cohorts, like leadership cohorts, that they might submit a testimony in Spanish, like a written testimony, and then use a translation like service like Google Translate or something so they'll have both versions there. So it's just like a nudge to legislators, like hey, like I'm having to translate this just so you can read it. Like they're hoping to make the system more accessible for languages. And we heard, actually, Emily and I heard Senator Golden and Ashland like say he was committed to expanding that accessibility for language barriers. So that's another piece. But I hear you on like the timing of things, and the written testimony is you're able to do that really anytime between now and I'd say lobby day. So again, April 20th. Bye, Christy. Thanks. Oh, she already left. So in my opinion, the sooner the better. So we'll have, the access to like seeing all these different stories and like great messaging that comes out of those stories. And just to highlight like what Candy asked, like if folks can get it in by Monday or Tuesday, that'd be awesome. So we could use it for the hearing, but we're still in the session. And anytime between now and lobby day would be incredible. Did I answer all of your questions and speak to all those points?
Yeah, almost. If you could go a little further into like when written testimony time is open, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So, well, it's open right now. And do you mean like through OLIS?
Well, yeah, like
actual,
when does testimony open, right? Like bills
Okay.
are constantly coming up in the legislature, and that's great. But like when do we have the opportunity? When do I have the opportunity to actually write in?
I see.
And then also please speak on like where can I find this information and like submit my written testimony.
You bet. Okay, got it. I'm with you. So really any campaign or like partner this is a coalition campaign is what it's called. So 6 organizations that come together, and then other coalition partners like the Environmental Center that support a campaign like this. We've been accepting, we've been hoping to get testimony from pretty much from day one. Obviously, we needed to get things ready on the back end of like the bills being ready for people to read, to respond and react to writing your testimony. FAQ pages, like 1-pagers with more succinct information. So I guess like the answer is really like anytime, but based on like how I understand what you mean by your question is they will open this system called the OLIS system. And I would love to send anyone information on like the process of the legislature and like the timeline and how things work in a little more detail, because I think it's important. And I'm still learning a lot of that process too, because there's so many things that are, there's so much that's involved with it. But once this system opens and the bills are plopped into this OLIS system, when I say OLIS, it's Neil and I were both like, what does it actually stand for yesterday? It's like Oregon Legislative like Information System or something like that. But it's the legislative portal.gov. Here it is. You can find any bill, you can find any committees that these bills live in, you can find all the legislators that are like co-chairing these bills and sponsoring them. So it's a wealth of information. It's just a little bit hard to poke around. But once these bills are uploaded, you can track them and you can see when, once the bills are uploaded, you can see and submit testimony that way and see when the hearings are scheduled, see when, dates like that pop up. So I could look at that with anyone at any time. So officially, you can submit your testimony through OLIS once the bills are uploaded, which they're currently not. So that's why we have this every action form to like write your testimony in. And once the bills are finalized, they'll be plopped into this OLIS system. And then folks can officially, like anyone, right, in the state that's like tracking these can officially drop in testimony. And another thing I forgot to mention based on your question was you can actually attend the hearing virtually and be called on to speak from anywhere. And, if you're like, oh, I'm 3 hours away from Salem, which we are here in Central Oregon, or at least a couple hours, you can sign up to testify remotely. I heard that you're less, like you might be called on like last, like you might not be a priority, but if you're someone with a really compelling story, we as like the kind of back end campaign folks can like nudge the chairs of the committee so that you are called on, or if you're like really excited to testify, we can like help make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you.
I know we're so over, so I just wanted to make sure, but I'm happy. Yeah, like Emily said, we're happy to stay and answer questions. And Candy or Neil, is your hand up for something else? Or is that a different?
Yeah, can I
screen?
just follow up briefly on that? So a couple of other pieces, like the system is not designed for public feedback, and the public feedback process is very non-democratic and challenging. And so that's part of what we're trying to do is like help bridge those barriers. Some of those are information barriers, and some of those like for example, you can't provide testimony officially until there's a public hearing scheduled. So until it makes it on the Senate Energy and Environment Committee hearing agenda, there's no way to actually provide testimony. You could send messages to legislators, but that's still not up. So it's still not possible. So that's like what we're trying to do is help bridge that and say, well, you can provide the testimony to us, say it's okay for us to upload it, and we'll deal with the clunky system. But for bills, it's always important to talk to your representative. But for bills that are going through committees, kind of where we're at right now is you provide that testimony ideally before the hearing, if it's written, and then the system stays open for 48 hours after the meeting started. So for Thursday's meeting, that means it'll stay open 48 hours after Thursday at 1. So if you watch the hearing and then have opinions, you can share those officially through the system. We will, or the Building Resilience Coalition will try to help. It's helpful to do it through their forum. And even if you want to, like, any of you want to submit and understand how OLIS works and like, go in and try to find a bill that you're interested in, any of us would be super happy to help you with that. And if you do that, you can still submit that testimony through the forum, the Building Resilience forum that's that every action document, and then just select, I already submitted on OLIS, and then they won't do the uploading, but then they'll still have a copy of your testimony to be able to pull quotes from for all the other pieces. So that's the step that we're in right now. And then as this is the kind of, really, it's like the second step of a bill. And then once there's a public hearing, then there will be a work session, and then somebody will have to decide how much money it's going to cost, and then Ways and Means, there's like a whole bill becomes a law process that happens after this. But yeah, being able to testify remotely has been amazing. For like big bills like this, it's hard because there's so much happening in the legislature in such a short period of time that they have 45 minutes to take testimony for something that will have hundreds of people that would be willing to if it was available. So it's limited there. But for other bills, to be able to testify remotely has been amazing, to not have to go to Salem. But if there's something that you really care about and you want to go to Salem, when you sign in, anybody can go. And when you sign in, you say where you came from, and they prioritize testimony based on people that traveled the furthest. So if you drove to Salem and wanted to testify for something, they'll try to make sure that you're able to be heard. It's still only 2 minutes, which is bonkers, but that's what you get.
Gotta be succinct.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, this is great, great discussion, and I think good lessons for us. I think we talked about wishing that we had the opportunity to even just have the testimony training before session or at the beginning of session, where we can talk a little bit more about this process and then talk about the bills once we get closer to them, because it does take kind of having to be ready to jump when the hearing gets scheduled, because we didn't know that the hearing was going to get scheduled. We're having conversations with the sponsors, and we still don't know when things are getting scheduled, and so it can be confusing. But I saw that there was another hand up, and then we can wrap up and follow up individually. you all have our contact info.
I know where you live.
You sure do. My parents are picking up a ladder tomorrow, so if you have other questions, we can do that then too.
Candy, go ahead, and then I can also answer your question in the chat after you ask this one.
Oh, well, mine was just one that got answered in the chat, and it was about whether to submit separate ones for the zero waste bills and separate ones for the Building Resilience Coalition.
Yeah,
So-
separate for sure.
Separate.
Thank you.
Okay,
for
but
that
not
one.
for
Yeah,
each bill. We can do it as a supporting all four
correct.
at a time.
You
All
got
right,
it.
perfect.
Yes. And thank you for saying that you can try to get other folks to submit their testimony. That would be like my bonus ask of you all, like sharing this, and the testimony toolkit is, feel free to use that and share it with other folks. We also have like a variety of email templates. Like for instance, if Jacob, you're like, oh, my organization that I work for wants to like ask our community members or contacts to submit testimony for this. I'm speaking on behalf of Building Resilience, but for Building Resilience's campaign and testimony, we have like a template email, so you don't even have to write that email. I can just send it to you and that can be your ask.
Well, I would love for you to send one to me.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
you bet.
Yeah. Because our climate reality group has a Facebook following of 50 people, 50 plus people, and it's very easy to put that in there and ask them to send it off.
Yeah. Well, if you all are familiar with Google Docs, I can drop this Google Doc link in the chat. You just have to promise me that you won't edit this version, but if you are familiar with how to use it, you can make a copy of this version just because it's just you two.
Okay.
But if you're not comfortable doing that, I can download, if you don't know how to do that, I can download this into a PDF or whatever, and then email it to you, Candy, directly.
Yeah, I think I can do it.
Or you can
with the
copy and
Google Docs.
paste.
And I
Okay.
promise not to change it.
Just make a copy. Yeah, you can like copy
Yeah.
and paste it into your email. Jacob, you're cracking up. Okay. Udara.
I just wanted to speak to Candy's question about submitting separate testimony for the waste bills. So kind of like Neil was saying, these bills come up, or the hearings come up really quickly, kind of unexpectedly sometimes. So the public hearings for the waste bills passed a couple weeks ago, but if you're submitting testimony for the waste bills, that's actually a good opportunity to write directly to your legislators or the folks on the committee. And I think we can send some follow-up information about that. So you can write directly to legislators at that point once the public hearing OLIS submissions are closed.
Can I ask another quick question? And this is primarily oriented towards Udara and Neil and the Environmental Center's focus or new focus on advocacy. I mean, this training is great for state advocacy, but we all know that local advocacy is just as important. And I'm thinking about the landfill siting situation that's going on that's before our county commissioners at the moment. So are there plans to hold similar kind of trainings that are more localized at the county level or anything like that? Is that on the Environmental Center's program?
I can speak to the landfill piece. So we're always trying to get folks to like head to the SWAC website, and I think on the local level for things like this, they're much more, I guess, like ad hoc in that there's not necessarily like a legislative session. It's through a separate process. So that's something I'm trying to learn more about and get more involved in. But as far as the landfill siting, we did try to host a green drinks that was about the landfill siting, but I think the timing for when that the committee wanted to and the county wanted to have like more public outreach didn't line up with that. So we'll keep looking for other opportunities to, through the Environmental Center avenues, get the word out through like green drinks or other special events. But I think that's an area that, kind of as things come up, we can try to be more active in engaging folks and training folks. Neil
Cool,
or Lindsay, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, we've gone through phases. It's largely project or like kind of big thing dependent. So we'll partner with other groups or work on some of that grassroots advocacy, like when we went through the climate planning process. Or another thing that, you know, is helpful for us too is, you know, developing those individual relationships, because, you know, broad blast to everybody can get some folks engaged, but when we are able to connect with folks directly and be able to say like, hey, this is somebody that has an interesting perspective, doing those direct asks is also a spot that I think we also do, to make sure that different voices are included. Yeah.
We
Well,
have another event coming up about the Deschutes County's 2040 comprehensive plan.
oh yeah.
You'll be able to give some input on the policies directly to the county there, and then we'll also follow up with resources on how to comment and get involved in that process too.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks, Lindsay.
Well, thank you all for engaging and extending this a little bit longer than we had planned. And thanks to our guest speakers. Weird calling you a guest speaker, Becca, but and nice to meet you on another call, Emily. So we will follow up with all of these links, but if you opened them, you can get started right away. Especially, or yeah, you can get started right away. And then if you have questions, like this is our opportunity to try to you know, help support how we can. Yeah, so please follow up. We will send a follow-up from this event, and then look for those other opportunities to engage, because part of this, you can go on to OLIS, you can follow these bills to see when there's hearings and those types of things, but you can look for our summaries, and when there are those kind of key moments to engage, part of that is kind of the role of community groups and coalitions to be able to communicate that out, especially if we know something that's happening that's not on the website yet, like knowing about the hearing next week. So thank you all for being here. And we look forward to seeing your testimony, and thank you all for your engagement in all of this work.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for having us, Udara and Lindsay. Good to see you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
everybody.
thanks for being here, everyone.